This is Shalom World Podcast.
Welcome to Voyage. I am your host, Francis Hogan. Welcome to our sharing on the second half of St. John's Gospel. And now we come to the end. We come to chapter 21, which is literally an appendix onto the Gospel. Someone in John's community decided that it was necessary to clarify the relative positions of Peter and John, because with John now an old man and ready to go back to God, they were entering into the post-apostolic age. Scholars debate as to whether John himself wrote this text or whether it was his community. But since John was part of this event that we are speaking about, it seems to me that he is at least the source of the information, if not the actual physical writer. This is an incident in which the apostles meet Jesus by the Lake of Galilee. In John's Gospel, it's called the shore of Tiberias, and he's referring to the western side of the Lake of Galilee, where the city of Tiberias had been built in honor of Caesar. When you go to the Synoptic Gospels, you find that a message was given to the apostles that he is going before you into Galilee. It is there that you will see him. So this is the event of the meeting Jesus in Galilee. John has already told us that there were many signs that Jesus gave, and he hasn't spoken about them all. So this is one of the ones that John has not referred to before. It is very noticeable at the beginning of this text that not all of the disciples are with Peter. Only 6 of them join him. Peter takes the leadership. It's his decision to go out on the lake. But since they're all not with him, that is a sign of what will happen in the future. I'll talk about that later. They caught nothing and they headed back for shore. So the usual frustration at night. And just as dawn broke, Jesus was there on the shore, waiting for them. But the disciples didn't recognize him. And the amazing thing is, well, it's amazing for me, that they didn't associate sunrise, dawn, the risen Lord, because that's what they've been dealing with since Easter Day, that it was at sunrise, at dawn, that Jesus actually rose from the dead. And Jesus doesn't tell them, I am Jesus. It's high time that they actually recognize him. And so he says to them, have you caught anything, friends? So this is another clue he's giving to them. And they answer him correctly, no. But he says, well, throw your nets out to starboard and you will catch something. And these fishermen, whom we're told were very close to the shore, knew very well it was impossible to have a shoal of fish close to the shore. And they still threw their nets out to starboard. And they had this miraculous catch of fish. So what you're looking at is, it has to be Jesus. All that he's saying is right. What he's doing is right. It has to be him. And so you come to an extraordinary statement later on, that none of them dared ask him who he was because they knew it was him. Well, that hesitation says we know and we don't know. We're not absolutely sure. But they respond to this stranger on the shore. And they respond in exactly the same way as they would respond to Jesus. And they obey this stranger on the shore. Why should they do that? Because as fishermen, they're professionals. Okay. And the sign which eventually gets John's eyes opened is the great catch of fish. Instantly, John says, it's the Lord. Now, I want you to notice this. The discernment comes from John. Before Pentecost, John seems to have been the only one that was really able to discern the risen Lord. And Peter is leaning on John. Peter knows that John has this better insight than he has. And when Peter hears that it is the Lord, Peter acts. Now, that means that Peter himself has not been able to make that decision. But it's very important that he leans on John and he accepts John's discernment. And Peter is all action at that point. He jumps into the water and he swims to the shore. In other words, he is very, very anxious to show Jesus if it is him, if it truly is him and John says it is. He's very anxious that Jesus will see, I am your disciple again. I'm acting in obedience because our resurrection position is obedience to the word of the Lord. And so Peter is very anxious that Jesus will see that he's a beloved disciple. In other words, that he has recovered. Now, what we have here is that after the resurrection, Jesus revealed himself at various stages. Now, the Gospels actually give us very little about the post-resurrection revelations of Jesus. He has given much more information to our mystics and saints. But if you look at the Gospel as a whole, we're rounding up the Gospel now. If you look at it as a whole, John has been revealing Jesus from the very beginning. And he told us in the prologue who Jesus was. John the Baptist pointed out as to who Jesus was in chapter 1. And then John continued the unveiling of Jesus throughout the signs. And the final unveiling as to who Jesus was his own resurrection. And so the apostles should have been able to recognize him with confidence here. But before Pentecost, they're not able to do that. After Pentecost, there's no further hesitancy. In other words, what Jesus had said to them in John 15:5 is actually true. Jesus had said, without me, you can do nothing. And it is perfectly clear in this incident that they were not able to bring in a catch of fish without Jesus. That is the point that John is trying to show us. Without him, they can do nothing. But with Jesus, they can accomplish all that God wants to do. So let us look at what is the meaning of this. Some commentators want to say that this is John rehashing Luke chapter 5. But if you go into what John is actually saying, that is not possible. But since these men are fishermen, they would have been out on the Lake of Galilee many times with Jesus during the ministry. And we know from the Synoptic Gospels that they had numbers of experiences with Jesus out on the lake. So you don't have to present this as a rehash of Luke chapter 5. It is like it, all right, because the emphasis is on the mission. And back in Luke chapter 5, they were told that they had to be fishers of men. And of course, Jesus would use their own way of life as a metaphor for the mission that he was calling them to do. So here we see that this incident represents the mission to all the world. Peter is in charge. He has been appointed as the chief shepherd. John doesn't give you that appointment. You get it in Matthew 16. John, the contemplative one, discerns the Lord much quicker than Peter, but Peter will act as soon as he knows that it really is Jesus there. So they bring in this huge catch of fish, and John says there were 153 fish. That's a most amazing number. But the commentators say that at the time that this happened, it seems that the zoologists in the area thought there were only 153 types of fish in the sea. We know that that's absolutely not the case, that there's such an abundance of life in the sea. But anyway, that 153 therefore represents a world harvest, a universal harvest, a harvest of every kind. It's like what you hear in Matthew 13, a haul of all kinds when they collected the fish. Okay, so it's all types of people everywhere. Or the way John put it in chapter 14, there are many rooms in the Father's house and there's room for you. And the other thing is that the net was not broken. In other words, the unity of the church has actually held, which is amazing. And it also illustrates their inability to do anything spiritual without Jesus actually present. So what the text shows us is that they can do nothing until Jesus is present. Jesus directs the thing, and it is Jesus who empowers this mission. Then they can bring forth the fruit. In other words, it's all Jesus' fruit. He's the vine. They're just the branches of the vine. So Jesus alone can draw all men to himself, as he said twice already in the gospel. When I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw everyone to myself. But it's through the apostles that he wants to do this. And so you find a very telling statement in Luke 17:10, where Jesus said that, when you've done everything that God has asked you to do, you are to say, we are merely servants. We've done no more than our duty. So even when we have accomplished everything that God has asked us to do, we are only servants, and we're merely doing what he has asked us to do. So let's come to Easter breakfast with Jesus. Our soul's breakfast is the Eucharist. So I'm giving you a hint there. Okay, so look at what John actually says. They saw Jesus on the shore. He already had a fire burning in order to dry them and warm them after their night's work. And he cooked breakfast for them. The breakfast was ready. This was the absolute sign that he loved them. And here you have Jesus doing in the resurrection what he has already done in the washing of the feet. He is serving them. He is at their service, and it continues while he is in heaven. He doesn't change his relationship with the disciples. And here is the risen Lord still at the feet of his disciples. I've mentioned a number of times that the humility of Jesus in the resurrection is totally astonishing for me, because we associate people who are victorious and on top and they're number one as sort of making sure everybody else appreciates that. Jesus kept the humility and the littleness that he had during his lifetime, which is absolutely amazing. And so when Peter hauls in the shoal of fish, Jesus asks them to bring something to the table. This is very interesting. If you remember back in chapter 6, in the multiplication of the loaves, he asked them for an offertory. They were to bring something to him. He always wants their participation, because in all the Eucharists that are coming, they are the ones who are going to be doing this for the people. And Jesus will be receiving their offering. And so when they arrive, Jesus has anticipated all their needs and everything is ready for them. It's really very beautiful. When we look at this, we see that the Christian community will gather around Jesus at dawn every day to celebrate Eucharist. And he has all our spiritual needs ready for us. He has paid for everything. He is our food and our drink. He is our life. He is our word. He is our forgiveness. He's absolutely everything. He is all in all. He is the Alpha and the Omega. John notes that there was a charcoal fire. And the last time we met Peter at a charcoal fire was during the interrogation of Jesus by the Sanhedrin in chapter 18. And at that point, Peter denied Jesus 3 times, publicly, in a most awful way. And in this situation, at this charcoal fire, Jesus is going to give Peter the opportunity to recover publicly by making a public declaration of his love for Jesus in front of the whole apostolic college. It has to be public, because the reconciliation of Peter and the reconciliation of his office before the apostles has got to be public. Jesus doesn't want any disputes when he's gone. He doesn't want any of them to say, I'm not having Peter as a leader. Because don't forget, all the apostles are not present. They're not all with Peter. Most of them, or at least some of them, don't think Peter is the one. The other thing that John wants you to see, and all of the Gospels actually emphasize this point, it's Jesus and they still hesitate. So how do they know he's not a ghost? A ghost will not actually come to you and communicate with you and help you to bring in a miraculous shoal of fish. A ghost will not actually prepare breakfast for you and provide all your needs. And a ghost will not sit down and eat the food with you. And so it's the emphasis on the reality of the resurrection, that it really, really is Jesus. It's the fact that he appears and disappears that is so disconcerting. But John wants you to see the sheer normality of this meeting, because this is what the fishermen did in those days when they came in from a night of fishing. They set up a charcoal fire, they cooked some of the fish and had breakfast, and they relaxed and they warmed themselves, having been freezing cold out on the lake during the night. So the next sign that Jesus gives to them is that he stepped forward when all the fish was cooked, and he took the bread and he broke it and he handed out the portions as he always did. So they have to recognize him. And he did the same with the fish. Well, go back to chapter 6, you have the same thing there as well. In St. Luke's Gospel, we heard the same kind of thing from the two men on the road to Emmaus. It was the breaking of bread that made them actually recognize him. So Jesus is reminding them that he is not only present at their Eucharistic gatherings, he is present at the meal, he is present in the meal, and this meal that they're having now represents their Eucharistic meal. And so the challenge for every disciple for all time is to recognize him in the breaking of bread. And so the disciples are going to have to help the members of the church to look beyond the bread to find the risen Lord. There's another thing as well, and that is that John is trying to say to us and to all the beloved disciples for all time that Jesus is with us on the mission to all the world. He travels all the roads with us. He goes to every people. He is in every gathering. Wherever 2 or 3 of us gather, he is there. The success of the mission is due to him, not to us. We can't claim anything for ourselves. He's present in the diversity and unity of the groups. He's present in the sheer variety of the peoples. That's the 153 fish that are in the church. He's present in the living word. He's present in the Eucharist. In other words, he is the vine and we are the branches. He is the head and we are the body. We are all one. And so, since Jesus is present to the church, see, we're at the very end of the gospel and John needs to say something very important to us. Since Jesus is present with us in such an ubiquitous manner, there's no need for appearances. There's no need for the post-resurrection appearances to go on once the first witnesses are absolutely certain. And once they pass on the teaching of Jesus to the church can go on. This is what you read in the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 11. Only faith can guarantee the blessings we hope for, or prove the existence of the realities that are present, and at present, remain unseen. It was by faith that our ancestors were commended. Now, just to finish this off, I want to say that there is a present message at the time of the early church, and there's also a prophetic forecasting for the end times that you and I are actually living in. Okay, so let's move down to the end times that you and I are living in. All the apostles are not with Peter. The church doesn't have the same kind of unity as it had before. Today, the Eastern Orthodox and the Western Protestant churches are not really with Peter. They want to be with Jesus, yes, not really with Peter. The church labours all night in the night of history and seems to be catching nothing. But Jesus is spiritually present, as I have explained. And eventually Jesus will return. And it is an action of his that will bring in a miraculous catch of fish for the church, will bring in an absolutely extraordinary harvest for the church. And when the church's mission is over, completed, Jesus is waiting on the eternal shore to celebrate the messianic banquet with us. And Peter himself In spite of all the odds and all the difficulties of the mission, Peter himself will draw that net to the shore. The church will survive to the very end. And so we have to labour faithfully and lovingly in the vineyard, because Jesus is in fact waiting for us at the eternal shore. Now that applies to each individual as well as to the whole church. All of us have to labour during our lifetime to testify to Jesus as much as we can. And when we die, he is waiting for us on the eternal shore. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht they live. Goodbye. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.